Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so happy you're here. My name is Tamara Bingham. I'm the Director of Business Development at Center for Change. I'm here with Dr. Dana Herron, who I'll introduce in just a minute. So happy you all could be with us today. I want to do just a few housekeeping things that you should see on your screen before we get started, and then I'll introduce Dr. Herron and we'll get going. A copy of the PowerPoint is in the handout section of the toolbar. So if you click on the handout section, you'll see that there. You're welcome to download that or print that if you need to. There's also a copy on our website on our webinar page. So you can always get to it later if you don't need it now. A copy of the post test is in that same section of the handouts, in the handout section of the toolbar. This is for reference only. In order to obtain continuing education credit, you must take the post test online, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. You're welcome to submit questions in the questions section of the toolbar. We'll try to get to some of those at the end of the webinar. We likely won't be able to get to all of them. So Dr. Herron has her email address on one of the slides, and you can reach out to her directly if we don't have a chance to answer your question. So feel free, there are a lot of us on the webinar today, so it's not possible to have you unmuted or have your cameras on. So please feel free, however, to just type your questions in the questions section of the toolbar, and we'll try and get to them. When the webinar ends, there will be an evaluation that will automatically pop up on your screen. If you would just take a quick minute to complete that evaluation, that would be really helpful for us. That's a continuing education requirement for us. It's completely anonymous, so feel free to give candid feedback. Then we tabulate those results and send those to the continuing education entities. So if you would do that, we would appreciate it. And then, most importantly, about an hour after the webinar ends, you will receive a separate email from GoToWebinar with a link to take the online test. Again, that you must take the test online in order to receive continuing education credit. Once you pass the test online, then your certificate will automatically be downloaded to your computer. So if you don't see it on your screen, then check your downloads file, because sometimes it hides in there. Okay, we're ready to get going. I'm so happy to have Dr. Dana Herron here with us today. She's a clinical psychologist. She is the founder and owner of Monarch Wellness in Washington, D.C. She has expertise in eating disorders, trauma-informed medical practice, and couples work, and the intersections of those things together. She's also an author and has authored the book, Loving Someone with an Eating Disorder: Understanding, Supporting, and Connecting with Your Partner. So welcome, Dr. Herron. We're thrilled that you're here. I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to hand the screen to you. So give me just a second and I will do that. Okay, you should see it. Yep, there it is. All right, I'm going to turn off my mic and my camera so that you can get going. But if you need me, I'm right here. Just holler.
Thank you so much. Another thing, thank you for that lovely introduction as well. Another thing that you should know about me today is that I am allergic to the entire world. So if I sound a little congested or stuffy, I apologize in advance. Let's see. I am looking at I'm also very bad at technology, and I'm looking at a big screenshot of myself, but I fixed it. So yeah, as Tamara had mentioned, I'm here today to talk about working with people who have eating disorders and their partners through a couples counseling lens. I have a small practice here in Washington, D.C., a little group. We specialize in eating disorders, and for a very long time, I was getting calls from partners and spouses asking, how can I be supportive? Should I do this? Should I do that? And people always joke that I'm a frustrated librarian at heart. I wanted to give them a resource, and there wasn't one. So I ended up writing this book that is specifically geared towards the partners of the people who are struggling. And I think that providing partners a space to exist is extremely important. And of course, we'll talk about why in a second. I want to provide you, hopefully, with a very strong rationale for inviting partners into the room. And then we can shift to, when you've done that, what do you actually want to say to them? What is important for them to know? What's important for them to unlearn? And Also, we'll be getting into the nuances of the delivery of the information that really matter, as well as thinking about how does my client and my partner and the eating disorder and me and their recovery all interact together, which is one of my favorite and most exhaustive topics. So we will save it for last. And that is what we will do. So the truth is that we don't see our clients for very much at all. We see them for, I discovered as a part of research for this, there are 168 hours in the week. We generally see them for 1, maybe 2, if we're outpatient. And I go to conferences and we talk and talk and talk about becoming an object of attachment or forming a safe and sacred space for our clients. And of course, that is extremely important. But if we only leave it to that 1 hour, you can see this pie chart here that really all of life is happening outside of those boundaries. And it's so important for us to be able to reach beyond the confines of our time boundaries. And a way that we can do that is by interfacing with the other people that are in our clients' lives. It's still not much. You can see that this is from the Office of National Statistics, which is a thing apparently, that the average person, and of course it can be way more or way less, we know how statistics work, but spends about 2.5 hours a day with their partner. This doesn't include sleeping. It's actually not that long, but when you think about it and when you look at this, it's a whole lot longer than we have. So helping that relationship to thrive is going to have so much more of an impact on our client than just them meeting with us alone. Beyond which, a partner is an appropriate attachment figure. More and more eating disorders we know are happening in midlife. This is a little graph that shows it, right? And the further we get into midlife, the more likely our clients are to be cohabitating, to be married. They're adult people, and we would hope that their primary attachment would be with a spouse or partner if they have one. Of course, we want to be there and we fulfill a very important function. And it's maybe sometimes a tinge of narcissism to our profession about how important it is in and of itself, or how impactful it is in and of itself when there's not enough other support happening. And I mean, we all know that attachment matters, right? But I think that one of the things we sometimes may lose track of is how inexorably it is entwined in the case of eating disorders, perhaps more than dealing with other issues, because food is so early intertwined with care, attention, really all that babies do. You know, they have a few basic biological functions, and eating is the one that I should say on a webinar, right? They eat and they poop, they sleep. So it really, when hangry came out as a word a few years ago, I finally had a word to put to an experience that it's so primal and so deep when it has to do with food. I really believe that healing food issues must be in some way relational. CBT certainly has a place, and dealing with things in addition to relationships certainly have a place, but ignoring somebody's primary attachment relationship when working with eating disorders is probably a big gap that will leave us really amiss. And then there's also the fact that the eating disorder, of course, plays a role in the couple, right? And the couple plays a role in the eating disorder. The partner is a part of all of it. You can't change one part of the system without changing other parts of the systems. So we'll talk much more about this towards the end of the hour, but some of the things that we see are that I worked with partners who use eating disorder behaviors as a way to communicate. I have somebody in particular I'm thinking of who uses often in order to communicate anger, that we had to do a lot of work on assertive communication and direct communication in the couple, and that helped the food symptoms to go down because it was this uncomfortable compromise where anger is expressed, but in a way that was harmful to her. And her partner sort of understood it, but she also struggled to, do all of these layers. So helping couples to communicate directly with each other, actually, we'll find is extremely helpful. Let's see. Also, there is some research that supports working with partners as very helpful. Cynthia Bulick is at the forefront of this work. I cannot say enough wonderful things about her. All of these, I'm not sure if it translated as the slides went through multiple hands, but if you email me and you would like these are clickable links, and I believe there's not a paywall for any of these. If you would like these studies, some of them might be a little more well-known. UCAN and Unite are probably the ones that most people would think of when they think of couples work with eating disorders. Basically, Cynthia's research is about what happens when we invite partners into recovery. And as it turns out, it really enhances recovery. And there's also some research that people who struggle themselves, that the people who struggle with an eating disorder, when they have had successful healing, more often than any other factor, they report that having a supportive and present spouse or partner is a huge factor in their own recovery. Now, we want to keep that in its place. We don't want it to become that the partner now has to be your client's other therapist, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's important to have in mind that we see them for 1 hour. They spend most of their lives other places, and we want to help those places be also healing and supportive spaces for them. EFT has done some work here, of course. And then they're starting to emerge now maybe not lots, a couple methods of integrating a little bit from CBT and a little bit from EFT and this SEFT way of looking at things. And then the task research has to do with that the couple engages in certain tasks that they have to engage in order to help themselves heal as a couple, as a unit, and also so that the client is able to, the identified patient is, if you will, is able to heal. Things like really describing the eating disorder and the impact of the eating disorder on the relationship in a non-judgmental and non-shaming way. Things like establishing better communication skills, things that all couples really would benefit to work on. I know I work on them every day. But they get so much more salience, I think, here because it is such a relationally important healing. Okay, so luckily I'm running a little ahead of time because I like to go on about this part. Psychoeducation is extremely boring. I hate it, and I almost always tune out when somebody starts talking about it. And it drives me crazy. And also, it is really, really helpful. And I like to talk to people about reframing it by thinking about information as a gift. You know, we have an extensive body of knowledge that we don't really recognize most of the time. And if we can let a partner come a little bit into this world, it can make them grounded. It can make them more present and supportive to their partner. It can help them in their own healing journey, I'm sure. I like this quote, change is the result of all true learning. It's not just about imparting the information. And this, I think, makes it a little less boring for me, which I need. When we offer good information, we are allowing a partner to learn how to set boundaries. We're saying to them that it's okay to do that. And ultimately, we can help them to self-regulate, right? If they can do self-care, they're going to be present and available for their partners. I often work with couples who, you know, I mean, we go through the Monday morning quarterbacking of a kerfuffle, And I'd say, well, like and what happened before that? What happened before that? We're sort of linking backwards, and it always comes to, I hadn't slept well that night. I was irritated because of a work thing, you know. So I think we can really impart to people that taking care of themselves is a way of taking care of their partners, and help to sort of make usually by the time a couple reaches to me, the water is muddy about what is whose responsibility. There's a lot of enmeshment sometimes of emotion states, or such a sharp division that the couple finds themselves unable to connect. So just saying, that's okay. It's normal for you to have big feelings about your partner and about your eating disorder, about your partner's eating disorder. And these are things that can be worked on. Just saying that, I think, provides an immense amount of relief for people. If nothing else, I don't know if any of you have probably had the experience of you work with somebody on, prioritizing who they are on the inside over who they are on the outside. And then the next week they come in and their unwitting partner has gone into a whole polemic about, oh, you're so lovely and beautiful, and look at your eyes, and and gone on and on and on about their exterior, thinking that they were helping. If nothing else, we can nip that in the bud. We can stop body comments. We can, sort of cue people to look at their own relationship with food, which is something that comes up relatively frequently. I hope you're seeing psychoeducation maybe in a little broader of a context than just like, this is what this means, this is this diagnosis. It's really a way of supporting and holding and containing your client and the couple. Of course, I'm very proud of this guide that I found, but there's of course they need to know what. You need to know what information they need to know, and that's data. But also, I'm going to breeze through that because you all know that, and I want to emphasize that how they receive that information can be even more important, which we'll get to in a moment. So, pardon me, the what, 9 times out of 10, I have to clear up a lot of misconceptions. Again, we forget what kind of ideas are out there. We're hanging out in our body neutral or body positive zone, and trying to make space for everybody's feelings. And people have all kinds of ideas out there about eating disorders. A lot of people still think it's about vanity. They just need to get over it. Just tell them to eat, just tell them to not eat. So clearing up misconceptions, I find, is, I love this quote, it's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. I was once at a red light and the car next to me started moving, and I was pretty sure that meant the light was green and we could all go, and I was wrong. I'm okay, but it was, you gotta double check. So of course, some common misconceptions. We often have to expand somebody's way of thinking about diagnosis. They think that it's only a food issue. They often, and everyone's different, of course, but often they don't understand that there's a whole world of ways of thinking and ways of feeling and beliefs that play a role. A lot of times, one of the more common things that I see is that a partner will try to convince their partner, will try to convince their loved one that, oh, you're lovely and you're beautiful, and I'm here for you, so you don't need this, right? A lot of times, I see that early on. A lot of times when I work with couples who have been together for a while, it becomes this eating disorder is a choice that my partner is making in order to harm me. And I really see a lot of the extremes. I mean, probably also they've come into treatment, so they have some sense that they're not in the middle of a spectrum. I want to especially highlight the misconception about eating disorders as a young white girl's issue, because obviously nobody wants anyone they love to be struggling in any way, and particularly with a food issue in some cases. And I find that there's an additional layer that we have to consider as we're talking about all of this, which are that eating disorders are typically considered an affluent teenager, who just, goes berserk trying to lose weight for the prom, right? And there is so much research that eating disorders are very underdiagnosed and very undertreated in lots and lots of populations, men, people of color, you name it practically. And that the bias goes every step along the way, from initial diagnosis to receiving a correct diagnosis to getting appropriate treatment, on and on. So anyway, I just want to make sure that that's on our radar screen as we are moving forward. So a lot of times the initial education is, yes, in fact, this man can have an eating disorder. Men get eating disorders. Yes, in fact, you can be an older person and have an eating disorder, and appropriate labeling of it. Often I find that sometimes the appropriate labeling is important. And then also I find that it matters that you want to make sure that they know the limits of diagnosis as well. So we can explain to them anorexia is this, bulimia is that, and all those things. But I think the more valuable knowledge, like that's good information and they have to have it. But I think the more valuable knowledge is that these are all constructs. These are all labels that we've created to describe sets of behaviors. So, and then we've done a lot of sort of gymnastics to make it just so that nobody's ever left out, right? But I think, helping partners to understand their clients in a three-dimensional way. A lot of times it seems like you're just putting a stamp on someone's forehead with a diagnosis. And I like to talk a lot around diagnoses and their limits. And remember, we had homosexuality as an issue in the DSM until 1979. We are really not infallible as far as diagnosis is concerned. And as we'll talk about in a minute, we're an authority figure to many people. Not everybody, but enough people that it's an important responsibility to think about what you are conveying when you talk about these things. Also, I think it's the third chapter. I wanted it to be the first chapter, but it didn't make any sense logistically. In my book is about just self-care. I find that partners, I actually had a slide in here of matching of a luggage set. I decided it was too flip, but I do find that partners generally are dealing with about the same amount of stuff that that your client will be, right? It just makes sense because we want to be with people who understand us deeply, and we feel understood when somebody gets our turmoil or our trauma or whatever it's been. So often, if our client has trouble with self-care, you can expect that a partner will as well. And I find that even if we don't do anything else, if we just teach that frankly to a partner, we can make a huge difference in the life of our client. You wouldn't think so at the outset. Oh, I talked with this guy about getting medical care for his tendinitis he's been dealing with, right? But who we are in the world is so based on how we're doing. So I know we all as therapists know that self-care is an ethical issue, but they don't have that background that we do. So we have to let them know that it's not selfish to take care of yourself. It's actually your responsibility to deal with the little corner of the world that is you. So okay, that's a different soapbox, but also setting expectations for treatment and recovery. A lot of people think it's one and done, especially if there's going to be a stint in residential, that everything's going to be great when they get back. We're in kind of a fast fix society, so we all know progress is nonlinear and all that stuff. We have to make sure that that's a shared understanding. I want to make sure I address the how of the psychoeducation, because it's so easy. We do have such a strong knowledge base to, don't you see that when you do this, that impacts the client, and now she's struggling. And also we care about our clients a lot. So from the go, we're often very we can be somewhat aligned with them, right? And so it's vital to understand that psychoeducation, and we'll talk about this a little bit more under, I hope, under the systems perspective, that it's not about, it shouldn't feel to somebody like they're being called into the principal's office, right? If you decide to do, there are lots of different logistical ways to go about partner education. You can be doing couples work, and that's your primary modality. I do that a lot, and I find it to be really helpful. You can be mostly working with your client, and then every couple months, a partner comes in for a session to touch base. Or you can just sort of be sending information out. But however you do it, it's very important to make sure that you set the tone that these are not things we would expect somebody to just know, right? To be very, very thoughtful. This is back to that matching baggage thing, that it's very likely that there's a lot of shame for the partner as well as our client, if we have an individual client, that we need to normalize and universalize the types of things that partners run into. I use a lot of words that are like, of course you would think it's helpful for me to make sure that she always has low calorie items available, even if I don't really want to go to that many stores. Of course. Or of course you would think, let me stop approaching her for intimacy because it seems to be out of the realm, or let me not tell him when I'm angry because I don't want to trigger off something. To really just normalize. And I find that one of the best strategies for normalizing is to get out ahead of it. So when I have a partner in, or when I'm doing couples work, a lot of times you can see this drawing here. I sort of like draw the negative space. I talk about things that aren't as helpful, and I make kind of educated guesses based on what I know from the client or from the couple about what sort of things might go on. And I before I see it in the couple, I just lay out on the table, here are some things that wouldn't be that helpful. Body comments is always in there, right? Because people just don't know. People just have no idea that a body comment can be harmful, especially if they think they're saying something nice, right? And also remember that it's much easier for people to recognize yourself in a story than to realize something that I'm doing is a problem. So like, these are a couple stories, you can read them later, that I talk about body comments. I also go through a bunch of often like strategies that, these are some strategies that you would think would work, that seem like they would be a great idea to do, but they ultimately fail. And people just don't realize it because eating disorders are so different and weird. And I then go into some of the things that I frequently see with a little bit, and I probably don't go through all of these, a little bit of an educated guess about what's possible to happen. So pretending it doesn't affect you is one that I think a lot of people really, a lot of partners tie themselves in knots trying to not make it worse and trying to be helpful, and lose themselves in the process. And actually what happens for our clients then, or for the identified person, is that they do notice and they feel incredibly guilty. And it's also another thing that can't be named, right? You can see that there's something happening, but the partner doesn't acknowledge it, reality gets subverted, and things get muddy. So I might get ahead of that by saying, it would be okay. So let's say a client, it would be okay to say that you're disappointed that your client won't be able to come to the big birthday buffet this year because she's not at that moment in her recovery right now. It's okay for you to be affected. Now, there's a difference between I'm affected, of course, and change for me. And sometimes I'll have to get ahead of it by saying, I often see people want to heal together, which is a very reasonable thing to do. I often see sort of like a bargain thing happening that's a little bit of guilt tripping and a little bit of strong arming, where like, okay, you're going to stop your eating disordered behaviors. I'm going to stop doing drugs and alcohol, and we'll both heal together and it'll be great. But of course, that's too much for anybody to take on for each other, and it really ends up in a systemic problem where people feel over responsible for one another, and it makes it more difficult to heal. So if I were sharing this with a partner, I might tell a story, a sort of fictional story with, not fictional, but like de-identified and general, about times when it's not helpful. We also see a lot of people in the DC area. Everyone here is very data driven. So I get a lot of people who try to approach their partner with information about you need this many calories a day just to get through, or do you know that purging really isn't an effective method of weight control, and missing the part where it's not a logical process. Sometimes to help people, I should have put it in here, I will next time. Sometimes to help people understand the illogical process, I ask them to look at an optical illusion. It's one with, there's like arrows that point, they're the same line, but they're the same like distance, but they don't seem that way. It doesn't really matter. But like you look at it and you can't see it differently. It looks like they're not the same size, but they are. And I say to partners, like, imagine if somebody kept saying to you, it's not okay to see these as different sizes. It's not okay to think the things you think. It's not okay to perceive it the way you perceive it. It would be crazy, making you feel guilty. You'd feel bad. It sure wouldn't make you feel more healthy and whole. So I work with people sometimes around in psychodynamic thought. It's more like mentalization, the ability to perspective take. Another handy little one I like is telling someone to just eat normally is like telling an insomniac to just sleep, because that's a little more experienced in the air. I try to speak, if I can, the language of the partner as much as I can, while still having my own voice. And then also we have to think about, right, and we'll talk more about the specific couple in front of us in a moment. Yeah, in a moment, I'm doing okay. But just in terms of thinking about the partner, just some things to have in mind. I should switch these around because I think shame resilience is number one. Tread lightly. I would really tread lightly. The idea of a therapist intimating that you might be in some way enabling or worsening even your partner, the person you love's issues, that's awful. That's an awful idea. So really always have shame resilience in mind. And you can often guess that it might be around the same level as where your client's shame resilience is, because there is that matching baggage, the theory of matching baggage. And also, just this, when you teach anything, you're always thinking about learning styles. Is somebody that I want to send home with a book? I know I wrote the book and I want everyone to have the book, but not people who aren't really readers. Some people need you to just do some bullet points. Some people really they have to talk it through and arrive at the conclusion themselves. And you can't know all of that ahead of time, but it's just something to have in mind. You also want to think about boundaries. So if you're working with the couple is your client, as you know, right? So the boundaries there are very different. And they're all laid out, of course, in the beginning of treatment. One of the boundaries I like to have is I won't keep a secret. It's somewhat because I have no poker face and I'm a terrible liar, and somewhat just because I won't keep track of whose secret is what. And also I just don't think it's healthy with a couple. So that's one of the ones I lay out right away. Now your boundary is different if you are working individually with a client and having their partner come in occasionally, or even sending them home with something to their partner. It's a different, the primary relationship is between you and your client, and then the partner is sort of in and out. So in those cases, I think it's pretty important to be wary of. What I don't like to have happen is go tell your partner, blah, 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 blah. Have your partner read this. Have them go to the NEDA website without more, because then there's more onus and more burden on the client, which is one of the things that we're trying to avoid. Rather, I would much rather try to get them in and provide that information myself. Then I can also monitor how it's happening, right? Because I know I can only imagine there would be some temptation to change, just nudge a little bit some of the information until it becomes, Dana says you should, I really need, if I say, what if you invite more physical touch, it turns into, Dana says you need to give me a foot rub every night. It's just helpful to have them in, because then you also know everything. You have more data. And then, of course, the other two things, which is going to finally bring us to the systems perspective that I'm very excited to talk about, are thinking about both the emotional function of the eating disorder within the couple, right? Often, we talk a lot about, for an individual, what is the need that this behavior is meeting? How can we meet it in a healthier way? Often there's a need in the couple that the eating disorder behavior is meeting that we also have to figure out how to meet in a healthier way. And you also have to think about, now you, the therapist, exist to this couple, and you're a part of the system now too. As you see in our systems approach slide, where there's lots of very, very shiny gears interlocking. Imagine if you were turning one of those gears, all the other ones would go, right? And sometimes the littlest, tiniest gear that doesn't seem like it would do very much at all actually is the powerhouse that makes the whole thing go around. I love this quote, which I'll just say, even though you can no more separate one life from another than you can a breeze from the wind. I mean, that it's almost conceptually meaningless to say, this is you, and this, of course, we want to have emotional differentiation, but it's almost conceptually meaningless to say that there's a you that ends completely at a certain point, right? Now there's a lot here, so I would, and a little typo for which I apologize. I would just read those mostly later, but the heart and soul of it is, the question you really want to be asking is, how is everything working together? And there are a million different ways to ask that question. You can ask, you can do a detailed analysis of a specific moment, right? A specific decision, right before you purged, what happened? Right before the meal, did you know you were planning on purging when you sat down to the meal? And back and back and back. I find that when I do that, a lot of times we do get to the self-care of a partner, if it's, a part of the interaction, or the self-care, of course, of a client. In terms of thinking about the function of eating disordered behavior, it can be so many different things. There's so much. So some of the questions are about, and we'll talk a little more about this, like what happens before, what happens after, what other things are tied in with it? A lot of times we see sex and intimacy issues are all over this. For an individual, of course, right? Food and sex are both biological, physical issues that have accumulated a cultural layers of shame and moralism and all that kind of stuff. So of course that's going to play a huge role in a couple, right? Power and control issues. Who's in charge? Are we able to share power? I'll talk more about this in a second, but I see it a lot. One of the most important, one of the most important questions one of the most telling questions that I like to ask is about how aware about the emergence of the eating disorder in the couple. So is it that this couple met and the identified client was already struggling really badly, because that has a different set of indications than if this couple fell in love when they were both pretty healthy and then some things happened, some genetics got activated. It says something different about what sort of functions there might be on a more sort of maybe even unconscious level, right? We all have things that we're not aware of, and sometimes partners might be sort of compelled to move towards somebody who has disordered eating for any number of reasons, to normalize their own behaviors, or because they fear that if they were with somebody who was who was having a much easier time in life, that they wouldn't be able to hold on to them, abandonment things. There's a million different possibilities, but just to be thinking and chewing these over. One of the things I see a lot is splitting. So conscious of the time, but also not. So obviously what we want is in a couple to have a sense for both members that they are whole people with strengths and flaws that can be connected with each other and yet remain separate as individuals. But a lot of times what I start seeing when working with an eating disorder in a couple is that there becomes all bad and all good. And it plays out a million different ways. Sometimes it plays out, I'm all good and my partner's all bad for both members of the couple. Sometimes it plays out, I'm good when I restrict. I'm good when I don't restrict. And sometimes you see a certain interesting, like a collusion about we're going to be bad together. One person struggles with food, another person struggles also with food, or maybe with something else. But they're going to sort of sink in together because that's the price of connection for some people. There's a story that that's the price of connection. So again, we just want to be thinking, having all of these things in mind. This is one I see a lot. So in the splitting, these are roles that are commonly acted out. A lot of times there is some component of some traumatic experience, not always in disordered eating. And a lot of times when you sort of step into that world, you end up seeing this drama triangle. It's taken from the world of transactional analysis. And it basically puts forth that there are three roles that get played out over and over and over again when a system is not healthy. So there's the victim. The victim is done to, is harmed, and has no personal power. The persecutor or the abuser does to. A lot of times it feels like revenge, or I'll get you back, kind of, because they flip back and forth between victim and perpetrator. Nobody, you flip back and forth between all of them. So, that's it. I've had it with this. I'm gonna throw away all of your diet bars or something, right? And like a sudden random communication would be something that I might expect if this were active. And then the rescuer. So the rescuer, of course, is the role that therapists are the most pulled in towards. If somebody has a tendency towards one of these roles, that people get cast in all of them, and that you often switch back and forth. It's actually kind of interesting. You start seeing it everywhere, really. But we very much pull for the rescuer. So a constellation I see very often is an individual client feels harmed or aggrieved by their partner and wants to come into therapy and say, my partner is awful and bad and is terrible. And then the therapist rescues them by saying, you're right. Oh no, that's horrible. That's horrible. But it's not real help. And I think that's an important distinction. Real help means that something changes. But if you get sucked into the drama triangle, in this particular constellation, you would have an interest in maintaining your role as the rescuer. But you can't do that unless you have a victim to help, right? So it actually disincentivizes you if you end up in this role to really help the person to find their own personal power, because then you wouldn't be needed anymore. You wouldn't get to rescue this person anymore. So have an eye out for that, because we get cast in these roles and they come up. And remember now that if you're doing, even if you're not doing couples work, if you're working with an individual on their relationship, you have these 3 potential roles that you could very easily be bouncing around. And remember that you are now a part of the system. It's not just how does this function within the couple. And of course, that's a very important question. But and also, especially the more people struggle, the more you'll see these with clarity, a pull to play these roles. Okay, I didn't give that too much time because it's exciting for me. And now I'm just looking at my face for some reason. Okay, there we go. Along these same lines, meeting of self and relational needs, which is a fancy way to say feeling okay in the world, basically. A lot of people who have disordered eating are trying to, I mean, really anything. Anyone who has anything in the world is just trying to get their needs met, right? It's just a matter of, are you doing it in a way that's likely to work? And what I see often is that people will be trying to meet the same set of needs, often a developmentally early set, and they will try to meet it with the eating disorder and with me and in their romantic attachment. So, so you can kind of see these parallels of the same theme or motif goes across all 3 pieces of the work. And when you can identify what is the need here, then you can start thinking about how can that need be met, right? And sometimes it's you, remember the pie chart. Sometimes you can be a very effective helper in meeting developmental needs. And sometimes it's also about empowering other people in your clients' lives to be able to be more effective, or empowering your client to be able to be more open. So of course, having needs is human and good. I'm not saying not, but not all of the needs are current. Some of them are old needs, and without some consciousness around that, it can get really dicey, because you shouldn't be getting the needs of a 3-year-old met through your adult partnership, right? That's not going to work. It's going to be problematic for you and them. There's a whole bunch of needs, obviously, but I want to highlight some of the ones that we can help especially bring clarity to, and that are particularly pertinent when you're working with disordered eating. Boundaries questions and boundaries issues. If you think about it, many people oscillate, like, I will not take anything in, right? There's like a very hard, rigid boundary. I will not take in any food. I will not take in any therapy. No, thank you. I will not take in any food. Having a boundary that allows you to feel like you're a separate self, but also connected to other people, is something that I find a lot of people who have food things struggle with. Knowing that you make sense, feeling real and whole, feeling special, experiencing competence. I find a lot of people meet needs around competence in their eating disorders, because people can be quite good at it. And if they haven't had the opportunity to explore all of the other myriad of things that they're probably gifted at, it can feel like that might be the only thing for some people. So they'll try to meet that need through their eating disorder. And then when you're working with a couple, then you can, what if you take a stained glass class together? What if you can start opening up more space? I could go on, and I think you might have the sense at this point that I will if you let me. Very specifically, I also see a lot of conflict or agita around needing and being needed. People afraid to need, people afraid to not be needed, not trusting that there's a sense of wanting people just wanting you around if they wouldn't need. Sometimes I do see a sort of I call it a white knight complex of I'm going to save this poor vulnerable wretch, right? And if we think all the way back to the triangle, that is somebody casting themselves in the role of rescuer. Often the person who is struggling with their eating then is the role of victim. And the perpetrator, those roles don't always have to be people, right? So the perpetrator can be the eating disorder, can maybe be the evil treatment team who doesn't understand, right? It can be anything. The problem with it is that if in that constellation, if the person really started being more healthy and whole, they wouldn't need a white knight. And often people are attracted to that role who don't know how else to experience themselves as good. So sometimes our teaching is, you know, very much in the displacement, very subtle about, oh, it's good that you are taking care of yourself. It's good. You're good. I can see that you care about your partner. I can see that this is important to you, and so on and so forth. A lot of times the eating disorder is used as a way to push other people away, right? Especially secretive behaviors. A secret is a big thing between me and you, right? It makes it harder to be close. Or angry eating behaviors, right? Sometimes they can be very obvious or very hostile. It happens. And that's a communication. It can also be used sometimes to bring people to you if you don't know how else to do it. To say, look, I'm struggling here. I need some assistance. Or look, I'm in the same ranks as you. You have this and I have that. And a lot of times you'll see, I mean, of course, there's only so many permutations. You'll see couples that have sort of a rigid wall between them, and food behaviors are a way of maintaining that. You'll see couples sometimes that have anger or moving against that the food behaviors are a part of. And then you'll also see it as a relational bid. And so then our job in those instances is to teach them how else to meet their needs. A rigid wall is not necessary for a feeling of separateness. How else can you feel separate while still feeling connected? I also see a lot of pursuer distancer dynamic, which is basically that one member of the couple really wants to be attached and connected, and the other member of the couple experiences that as too much and fears engulfment or being taken over. And they just make each other so much worse, right? And I think, and maybe this is just a part of human nature, but the pursuer just doubles down and starts, I'm going to call more. I'm going to call more. How about now? Are you available now? And the distancer, of course, freaks out and engages less and less and less. Pointing out these dynamics can help any couple, but particularly where food is involved, many people now will start using food behavior as a way to gain distance or as a way to try to draw close in the distance or pursuer dynamic. I realize that's a little abstruse, but thanks for staying with me. We also see issues of power and control come up, right? Of course, many people suffering with eating disorders feel powerless in the face of it, and then simultaneously feel that it's the only power that they have, right? Of course, a healthy way to think about power is power with, that we are together sharing a sense of agency, and we're all on the same page here. Everybody wants to feel loved and whole. But of course, trauma, eating disorders, negative experience, marginalized group identities, all kinds of other things will get in the way with that. And remember, the power dynamic also comes up with you, the therapist, because for many, many people, we are seen as somewhat of an authority figure. So it gets really dicey. It gets really dicey in terms of who's in charge of what here, right? So sometimes a lot of our work is about helping individuals and couples delineate being in charge of and really caretaking for themselves and then being able to seek interdependency in a healthy way. Communication. This is the last thing I'm going to say before we go to questions, but communication, if you don't do anything else except do self-care and communication, I've had, I think, A+, gold stars, wonderful job. Communication has come up in the research as a #1 factor in helping couples heal generally and specifically within eating disorders, because a lot of times one of the primary functions of the eating disorder is as a communicative tool, a tool about pain, a tool about, I worked with somebody who would, you know, who would purge food that his partner had made, right? A communication of sort of rejection, of separateness, all kinds of things. Anyway, communication skills, I'm sure you're all aware of I statements and, you know, consistent messaging across your face and body, and also your language and your tone and your prosody. So all of that is very, very important. And that is the last thing that I'm going to say before I am asking about questions. Tamara?
I'm here. I'm here. It
Hi.
just took a second for it to be there. Hi.
Okay, hi.
Awesome presentation. Thank you. We have some questions. And folks, if you have a question that you haven't yet typed into the questions section of the toolbar, you're still welcome to do that. We'll try to get to a few before we finish. We recognize that many on are clinicians and maybe have a client at the top of the hour. So if you have to jump off, we understand, and want to do a couple of quick housekeeping things before we get to questions, just in case those folks have to jump off. So just 2 reminders. Number 1, when we do end the webinar, an evaluation will automatically pop up on your screen. If you would be so kind as to take just 1 minute to complete that evaluation, that would be helpful for us. That's a continuing education requirement for Center for Change. All of your responses are anonymous, so feel free to be candid. And then we tabulate those results and send them to the CE entities. And then about an hour after we complete the webinar, you'll receive a separate email from GoToWebinar. It will look similar to the email you received when you registered. It will be a separate email from GoToWebinar with the link to take the online test. You must take the test online in order to receive continuing education credit. Once you complete the test and pass it, the certificate will automatically be downloaded to your computer, so look for it there. Okay, Dr. Herron, here's our first question. This is from Benjamin. When shame shows up in a couple's communication around eating disorders, I wonder what are legitimate ways to mitigate its harmful effects.
Oh, that's really good. I like, you have to name it to tame it, right? One thing that I would consider early on is being like, I have to imagine that this would be hard to talk about. A lot, and normalizing. I know a lot of people, when they talk about these types of issues, really feel a lot of shame, and maybe sort of even getting out ahead of it to say what could we do to make this space a little safer, right? I use a lot of we language. I find that that is a good shame reducer. We all experience shame, right? Sometimes, I'm sorry, my thing's out of ink. Sometimes I might say something along the lines of, you know, we all have trouble connecting when we're feeling shame. So what can we do and we all have behaviors that we are not immensely proud of. So what can we do to help you to feel safer here? And kind of try to create a sort of normalcy around the experience of shame.
Thank you. Okay, the next question. Carrie's asking, can you talk about orthorexia when exercise and clean eating are central to the couple's relationship?
Oh, yeah, that's very common. That's very common. If I can get out ahead of it, I like to. I like to early on say something like, you know, our whole culture has a lot of ideas about food, which many people are surprised to learn are actually not really that healthy for people. For example, you know, many people think that some foods are bad or off limits, but we find through the research that an all foods fit philosophy actually helps people to be more in tune with their bodies. And we find that some other healthy food and body philosophies, like you can be healthy no matter what your size or shape is, or um, you know, things like that. I sort of try to get ahead of it. I do think it's very common that people seek people that are going to normalize their behaviors, right? So sometimes I might, you know, watching the shame resilience and everything, I might be like, what do you think about your own relationship with food? You know, here your partner is trying to heal, and do you really buy in to maybe allow some space for exploration? Do you really buy into all of this? Um, Sometimes it's not uncommon that there's been collusion around eating disordered ideas, right? That, oh, I worked with someone once who was really not doing well at all physically, whose partner was asking for her to do like a 15-mile bike ride of some type, and it was, you know, so a lot of times it can be, our role is in those instances to say, this is what we have found is a healthy way to relate to food and body. Many people don't really relate to food and body in a healthy way. I wonder if there might not be something in your way, and if so, here are some resources, kind of.
Got it. Thank you. There's a question from Marcia. It's long, so I'm going to try and abbreviate it. It's really about, is couples therapy to supplement individual therapy, or is it instead of? And if you're doing couples therapy, are you, as the primary provider for couples therapy, also seeing the client for individual therapy?
I prefer for if I have my druthers, I prefer for everyone to be an individual, and
Got
in
it.
couples. But I do, so I see the couples as supplemental. I try not to do straight couples therapy and also have my client, because then I'm sort of aligned. That makes a bit of a isosceles triangle. So I'll either work just with the couple or just with an individual, with an eye towards couples issues and communicating with a couples therapist regularly. Or I sometimes I'm working with a client, and every once in a while a partner comes in, but it's like a bonus. It's not like the heart of the work.
Right.
And when that happens, also, I talk a lot with my client about, what do you want conveyed? What are your goals? And, you know, it's about us bringing the partner in, not me treating the couple in those instances. I'm going to forward to my, because I know some people have to go, to I have my lots of ways of getting a hold of me. And I love talking about this. If you want, I can stay for another few minutes to answer some questions for people who don't have to go right now, but please connect with me. It's been a long pandemic and I'm an extrovert. So, you know, the one thing that's not on here is actually my email. So I'm just going to say right now out loud that it's Dr. Dana Herron at monarchwellness.com. Hopefully I don't have to spell all the way out, because nobody has that kind of time.
And folks, if you didn't catch that and you need Dr. Herron's email, just go ahead and reply to the cfcwebinars@gmail.com that you hear from me, and I'll be happy to pass it on. Okay, we'll do just a couple more. First of all, along those same lines, Kathy said, best training I've received in a year. How do I get your book?
Oh, you can go to Amazon. You can really just Google Loving Someone with an Eating Disorder. Someone else did come up with one with a very similar title on Amazon. Mine is not the one with the orange, but with the plate. Loving Someone with an Eating Disorder. Yeah, it's on Amazon. That's a really touching thing to have someone say. Thank you. Yeah, it's on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and I think Indie Books, if you want to get around that.
Wonderful. Okay, we're past the hour, so we'll let everybody go. Thank you, everybody, for attending today, and so appreciate it. And my thanks again to Dr. Herron. That was really phenomenal, and we so appreciate you participating.
Really enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Take good care, everybody. Be well.
Thank you. Be well.